So I'm basically going to go through the thread. I'm going to try real hard not to like make this the shit on Ross show, because what's the point? So, all right. I think we're live. Need to get the link. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second edition Creative Review for 2020. My name is Charlie Plain. I am hosting this because our scheduled host, Neil, is having audio issues. So I'm going to take over and we're going to go through this. So again, my name is Charlie Plain. I am not involved in 2E really. I'm the director of first edition. I am chairing the search committee for the new director of 2E, and that's sort of why I'm here. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. Starting from my left is TJ.
Yeah, I'm a Rata team leader of second edition, and I play this game for about from the beginning. And I start with first edition, but I quit it and start when second edition came out by Deceiver. And I really like that game, and I like the concept of people giving all what they can give to the game without getting money for it. And I think I have a good experience with tournaments. I know a lot of the people, and I really enjoy the game.
Great. Next is Nathan.
Hi, I'm Nathan Miracle. I am the 2E design director. I've been playing second edition since Necessary Evil came out, whatever year that was. So quite some time, and I've always enjoyed making cards, whether they were official or not. So that has led me to this position.
Next is Amber.
Hi, I'm Amber, current head of 2E Rules. Since we're thinking back on how long we've been playing, mine was, I think, 05-ish, somewhere between Reflections and Strange New Worlds.
Cool. And last is Jonathan.
Hi, I am the 2E creative director.
Excellent. All right. So I was not planning on hosting, so I have not prepared as much as I would have liked. So please forgive us for any rough spots in the questioning. Also, keep in mind that we are on a 10-second delay. So there's going to be 10 seconds between when we say something and when you hear it. So keep that in mind when asking questions to allow us time to respond. So let's get started. I'm just going to scroll through the thread here. This is a question about a sense of urgency to replace and announce the errata leader, but that's been done since then, and we don't have a sitting 2E director, so I don't really know what to answer that one. So here's a question for you, T-Jark. We have had two people in charge of errata. The first was considered proactive, and the second was considered pretty handoff. In your mind, is there a preference between those two, or is it a more, what's your take on that situation?
Sorry, can you make it more precise?
So the first errata czar was very proactive, very let's get out there and make changes. And the second errata czar was more hands off, like let's wait till there's a need to act.
Okay.
Do you have a preference between those two strategies?
Yeah, my preference is to be more active, because I want to see cards in play, and if they are overpowered or somehow don't work with the game, you can erase it. But if you are too passive, you can't see how cards really work. So I like, from the tennis, more active cards.
So in terms of, let's say a card is not really overpowered, but is worrying some players, would that be something you'd look at right away, or would you wait until it was a known problem?
No, I like to communicate with the community. So if someone would send me some concerns of a card, I would, in any case, will have a look at it and will see it. But it depends on how the team. So it's a team decision, a rata team decision. So when it comes to my focus, I will have a look at it and I will give it to the team, and the team will decide. So I won't ignore it. I will take every card that is brought to my focus. I will bring it to the team, and then the team will decide.
Okay. Once again, I am scrolling through this thread to find questions. I apologize for not preparing. So let me ask you guys this question. Since Ross has resigned, a lot of questions specifically about him aren't really relevant. But as the staff that will be working under the new director, what are your expectations for a new director in terms of how much that player knows the game and plays the game? We'll just do this panel style. I'll start with you, TJ.
Yeah, for me, I would prefer someone who has some kind of expertise in playing the game and has expertise in tournaments. But if he hasn't, he should have expertise in team working. So if I could choose, I would prefer have someone who has expertise in team working and tournament or game experience. If he fails in tournament or game expertise, he should be a team player. That's would be most important for me.
Nathan?
All right. Well, in terms of the behind the scenes stuff, the main thing I would expect is that this person can keep things flowing properly, make sure that things are where they need to be. In that respect, you don't necessarily need to know the game, but the director is also kind of the face of the game and has to communicate to the community. And in that respect, I think you do have to at least know the game. Even if you aren't a tournament player, you need to be able to make coherent posts where you're talking about the game and not making mistakes. I know when I read Fantasy Flight Games articles, there's often mistakes in those that are basic, this doesn't work this way in the game. And those are types of things that I would want that director to avoid.
Amber, so the question is, what type of experience as a player are you looking for in the next director of 2E?
I ideally would like to see someone with at least occasional tournament experience, but larger tournaments. So someone who is familiar with multiple metas and how cards can impact the game on a larger scale. There's been in the past an issue here and there that I think if someone was more familiar with multiple metas, that possibly the impact could have been lessened of those problems.
And last but not least, I'll ask Jonathan for his thoughts.
I'm not as concerned about the future director's gameplay experience or activity. I feel like the brand manager, it's more important that they have managerial and communication skills. They're not designers or rules or errata. So I don't feel like they need gameplay experience quite as much.
Yeah, so I'll just contribute my take as the director of 1E, which is the equivalent position. I don't personally feel that position requires you to be good at the game or to play every day. But I do think you need to have your toe in the water and more than that. You need to know what's going on, what people who do play are doing. Just because you can't, it's like bringing in an airline CEO to run a bank. There are some CEO skills that matter there, but if you don't know anything about banking, are you really going to be the best CEO that you can be for that company? That may not be a good analogy because business people do weird stuff all the time, but in terms of does the director need to be like a high level player. I don't think that's the case, but I think they do need to play and know what's going on. Yeah. I've Nathan, your point about seeing, Fantasy Flight articles written by people who very clearly don't play the game, that's it's not a good look. Moving on. We have a question here about an entire country with an active play group was lost due to decisions made in the recent past. What can this department do to either avoid that situation moving forward or even reverse the damage? So it's a tough question because we don't know all the reasons why, but the asker is implying that it was directly the previous director's fault. So just to ask the question here, what things would you guys be looking to do in your respective departments to re-engage players that left during the previous director's tenure? And we'll go in reverse order this time and start with you, Jonathan. Do you think there's much that the creative department could do in that regard?
Not that I can think of. I mean, creative would put lore and titles on cards, and that's about it. I'm not sure that there's a lot we can contribute other than making the cards flavorful.
Yeah, that's fair. Amber, any thoughts on your end? Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be related to your specific department either. So if you wanted to jump in, Jonathan, but just thoughts on the issue of player hemorrhage.
Yeah, rules wise, I mean, really, we're just trying to make sure that the cards work. And otherwise, to me, it seems more, something more that design and leadership would need to tackle. But really, unfortunately, I don't know of any specific thing other than just how the cards are done.
All right. Well, Nathan and TJ, I guess you guys have the most direct control over if this is a card issue, so you can speak to that. But again, what are your thoughts on this topic, Nathan?
All right. Well, from a card perspective, in designing cards, we need to make sure that we keep making interesting cards that people want to actually play, that will pull people in. So one thing that we're going to be doing this coming year is making related sets. So the upcoming expansion is going to be one for the 50th expansion, but after that, we're going to look at doing 3 sets that have a common theme that run through them. So we're hoping that can provide a bit of stability for players where they can come in and say, oh, this is cool. And even if there's not something in this expansion, there's something coming up that relates to it that might interest me more. So that's something we're looking at doing to help with that.
All right. And TJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, the case you mentioned, I think the main problem was a problem of communication, and I think for me as a errata team leader in my section, communication is a key point as well. You can't satisfy everybody, but you can communicate reason and some behind the scenes infos to get decisions be accepted. The problem in the past, I think, was a lack of communication. And one problem is that a lot of people like to post everything in the forum, and it's easier to talk with someone because you can get their reactions. And posting is always a little bit, you see, I'm a little bit pre-post area, so I don't like to follow all the posts simply because it creates problem. It's easier if you want to communicate and have a problem, you talk with people. So for my section, it would be I try to communicate as much as I can to get a feeling of the people and their problems. And I think that was the biggest mistake, was a lack of communication. So and if you say something, it's hard to correct it. And if you say it face to face or with we are a conference or so, it's easier to see what kind of reactions you create to your opposite side. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read this thread verbatim. It's from Alexei Korlyov, Ashby on the forums. Well, do you really want to select the new director using the same old, flawed, non-transparent procedures that caused all this situation in the first place? If so, there is my prediction. Mr. Plain will appoint a committee of 3 blind mice who, in turn, will select another low-profile clerk from Ohio with no playing or communication experience skills to lead 2E. After that, any players who will try to oppose that decision will be immediately attacked and demonized, especially if they are not from great state of Ohio themselves. And we will lose another play group in the results. Texas this time, or maybe Germany. Thanks, but no, been there, done that. So I wanted to address this specifically, and I apologize to the rest of the panelists if I end up talking a good bit in this section, but since I have been asked to do the selection committee, I wanted to address this point specifically. I have taken great care and time to plan how this process is going to work, specifically to make it as open and engaged as possible. I don't plan on there being any secrets. I don't plan on there being any anonymity to the process. Obviously, there will be closed discussions because the selection panel has to have the ability to talk about the interviews. But as much as possible, things will be open and honest. So let me sort of walk you through the process as I see it. And this will be posted in an article that I hope will be going up Monday. And then we'll be getting the process started. So I have decided, because this is an important position and there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the previous process and performance, that we're going to go with a larger selection panel. So we're going to have a 7-member panel. It is going to be myself as the chair, and my only role is going to be focusing on managing the process and assessing candidates in terms of the skills that are required to be a director. And I feel I'm qualified to do this as someone who has been a director for most of the past 2 years. We're going to have 3 staff members on the panel, and it's going to be TJ, Amber, and Jonathan, because they should have a say in choosing their nerd boss. And then it's going to be 3, anybody else who wants to volunteer from the community. The goal is to create a panel that is as balanced as possible. So as close to equal Americans and non-Americans, close to equal of staff to non-staff, as close to equal of competitive players to casual players as possible. So obviously, if no Europeans apply to be in the other 3 slots, it's only going to have 1 European, which would be you, TJ, but I hope some will. And then the goal is, in terms of choosing those other 3 volunteers, what I have done is identify a list of criteria. So for example, the list of criteria is for those 3 people. So the list has some contradictory things on it. For example, a non-American and an American. It has a competitive player and a non-competitive player. Obviously, one person can't check all those boxes, but the goal is to identify the set of 3 people that check as many of those boxes as possible. And that will make up the rest of the selection committee. And then we'll have a 7-member panel. Once the 7-member panel is chosen, we'll put out an application for the position itself. The plan is to make that application as simple as possible. If you look at the application for the 1E Rules Manager recently, it was your basic demographic information, why do you want this job, and maybe one other question. So I don't plan on making a super involved, complicated application, basically simple and to the point. The selection committee will see all of the applications and can choose anyone they wish to interview. And it's basically, if 4 of the 7 people want to interview somebody, we're going to interview them. I'd like to do applications for 1 week and then immediately start scheduling interviews for the next week. Obviously, with 8 people trying to coordinate their schedule, it's extremely unlikely to get everybody involved. So we're going to do a recording of every meeting so that panelists that can't attend an interview can watch the interview afterwards. These recordings will be saved so that the selected candidate's interview can be posted with only removing anything that's confidential about future projects. In terms of selecting the candidate, my goal is to have a candidate that is unanimously chosen. I understand that that is a tall order, and if after a small period of deliberation, it's clear that a unanimous choice isn't possible, we're going to do ranked voting with a requirement that the choice gets 60% of the vote and not 50, 60 plus 1. And so the way ranked voting works is each member of the panel would rank their candidates in order from 1 to 5, for example. This is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. If after the first vote, the first choice candidate has 60.1% of the vote, then that's the candidate. If they don't, you take the candidate that got the least number of votes and throw out those first place votes and take the second place choice of that candidate and move it up to first place. So for example, if this panel is the choice, if I got a first place vote from one person and Jonathan got from 2 and Amber got from 2, there wouldn't be anybody that had a majority. So the person who voted for me, that vote gets set aside and their second choice is now their first choice. So if that person's second choice was Amber, now Amber has 3 votes, Jonathan has 2, Amber would be the winner. So that's sort of the high level overview of my plan. In a few minutes, I'm going to go check on the chat room or on the forum thread and see if there's any questions about that. Again, I'm writing all that up for an article to go up this week, along with the solicitation for people to join the selection committee. So I hope that this plan, this plan is sacrificing some speed. So it is very likely that we will go into the vote without the new candidate selected. But in my mind, and I hope others will agree, right now it's much more important that we do this carefully and openly and honestly and be thorough than it is that we be fast. I don't plan on letting this drag on for months and months. I want to keep this moving. That will be one of my primary roles as the chair on the selection committee, but that is the plan. So I know TJ and Amber and Jonathan hadn't heard that yet, so I'm eager to, they had just said we're agreeing to do it. So I'm eager to hear if you guys have any feedback while we vamp for a little bit to see if the chat room has anything. So do you guys have any thoughts on that process? So everybody play the Jeopardy theme. I'll go see if there's anything in the chat room. Doesn't look like there's any questions on that. So somebody says that if this isn't done by the start of regional season, I see a problem. I really hope it will be done before that. If I take a week to pick the selection committee and a week to pick candidates, that means we're scheduling interviews at the end of January. If that takes 2 weeks and then it takes 2 weeks to deliberate, we've got somebody chosen by the end of February. Is not a lot time done before then, but done before regional. So I'm hopeful that that is a schedule that we'll meet. Nick Yank wants to know, why not have open video interviews that people can watch and then have a public vote on the appointment of the next TUI brand manager? I considered that as an option. I decided not to do it because voting gets into politics, and I want politics to be out of this as much as possible. I want this person to be chosen because they have demonstrated the skills required for the position, and they have demonstrated to the panel that they have a plan. As with all CC positions, once we've chosen somebody, they go into a period of probation. So they get the job for 3 months. There's a public thread where people can ask them questions and comment on it. I'm fully planning on posting the interview with that candidate so people can see it, ask their own questions, and then if there's significant problems, the board can revoke that invitation before the end of probation. And then before that person moves on to the job full time, there'll be another a period of comments. So this is, in my mind, the best hybrid between a purely democratic approach, which will realistically involve tons of politics and a job interview search, which is going to let us focus more on, does this person have the skills and the temperament and the plan to do this correctly? But there will be there will be a public component, obviously. This is too important. All right. Moving on. Here is a question. When will 2E game design stop changing the very basic elements of the game? There are a bunch of examples here, and I can give you some of them. Some of them are years old. Some of them are still relevant. Space and planet are required to win the game. Voyager has always had the ability to win with 4 space missions using an event. When your opponent sees it, every event destruction will be kept in hand to prevent this happening. Then a mission came out including this ability. And to make things even worse, it was a very easy one. So rather than get into all of the specific examples, because I don't want to debate the examples, the context of this question is there's another community that's not happy with where design is going. What do you have going forward, Nathan, to sort of address some of these concerns and respecting the fundamentals of 2E, but still innovating?
That is a very fine line to walk, but for a couple of reasons. One being there's a question of what do you consider to be the basic fundamentals of the game or the basic elements of the game. Because looking at some of these examples, I agree, and in some of the other examples, I'm like, well, the rewards you get for winning battle, that doesn't seem like a basic element of the game to me. It seems like that's something that could be changed. So it's like I said, it's a fine line to walk because of what people consider what are the basic elements of the game. I don't anticipate that we'd be doing anything as large as creating new ways to win the game, or if there are cards that do win you the game, they should still be true to what 2E does, which is attempt missions, complete missions, and score points. Excuse me. I'm looking at the post itself, and I'm sorry.
Sorry. Here's a follow-up that's part of the same post. What is design's plan for maintaining affiliation's identity?
Yes, that I think is probably the biggest point of this post, because I agree that affiliations have become kind of mushed together. That is one of the things that I enjoyed about Phase 2. I know there's a lot of differing opinions on Phase 2, but I do think we need to be more focused on this affiliation does this, other affiliations don't. So I mentioned that we are doing 3 related expansions in the upcoming year. The way we're structuring that is the first expansion is focusing on Enterprise and TOS era. The second expansion is focusing on TNG and DS9 era. And the third expansion is focusing on Voyager, and also pulling in some Voyager related things like Borg and Maquis. So we'll actually be focusing on individual portions of individual affiliations. And when we're working on designing the cards, we have a design space, Utopia Planitia. So we're making sure that when we put the cards in there, we split them out into, okay, these are Klingon, these are Romulan, so on and so forth. It helps with organization, but also helps us keep in mind these cards should be doing these things, not pulling from other affiliations. Does that make sense?
It does. So here's a question for the panel in general, sort of related to that. We have a situation just in this POR thread where the Austrian play group is very unhappy, but in the Cardassian region, there are happy, active play groups in Georgia and Alabama. How do you do your jobs with such polarizing opposite opinions? Like, where do you find the middle ground, and how do you identify the reality that this is such a complicated issue? Like, how do you avoid analysis paralysis in your work, knowing that there are such strong opposite opinions out there. PJ, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, it's easy because I'm working with my team, and my team is yeah, there are a lot of professionals, and they have different opinions. So I have more problems to keep the troops in line. I try to find a solution that satisfies most of my team, but I can't satisfy everybody. So when it comes to decision, I just want to vote it out, but I will have a time of discussing before, and I want to maybe have a time of play testing different solution of different cards. But when it comes to decision, then it's a decision made by the majority. That's the easiest way.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on that topic?
I would, as far as design is concerned. One thing that we keep in mind in design is that every card should please somebody, but almost no card is going to please everybody. And in fact, if a card is pleasing everybody, that's probably a bad thing, because it's probably going to become too ubiquitous, like tacking into the wind. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, especially when we're receiving feedback, because I'm okay if we're receiving feedback from the community where some people are saying this card is terrible and some people are saying this card is awesome. That to me is a good thing. If everybody is saying the card is terrible, that's something that we need to look at.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Right, so I have a question here that's about online play, and specifically the question is, when designing sets, is more attention going to be paid in the future to online playability? Now, Nathan, I do want you to answer that, but I want to ask Amber, if online playing is going to be more and more of a share of what's happening in the game, which realistically that's probably the case, at what point do you consider changing some rules to make online play easier, if any? I'm just curious on your thoughts on that. Is there a point at which we look at changing how some things work about the game's mechanics to support playing online, or is that never a line that we will probably cross?
At least as things stand now, I don't foresee that being a line that we'll cross, just at the risk of splitting the meta even more. Like, if people like the way online's played, they may only want to play online instead of with the in-person rules. It also seems like it might take away from the integrity of the game if we start saying, no downloads or no cards that get returned to the bottom of your deck, for example. So there'd have to be something pretty significant, I think, to have us look at changing that.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not advocating or suggesting an online rule set and a physical rule set. Just, is there a point at which enough people are playing online that you change a rule to improve the quality of life for everybody? So it'd be a change that would be across everything, not just an online specific rule. But I think your answer probably still stands. I just wanted to clarify. But in terms of designing cards, Nathan, the specific example given here is Shining So Bright, which I know that you didn't have anything to do with, but it's an example. This is a really neat card, but it is mechanically much harder to use online than in physical games. Is that something you want to be factoring in as a designer moving forward? Or if not, when would it be?
I'm glad this question was asked, because to be honest, we've not paid any attention to it. We've always designed cards with the idea in mind that these are going to be played at the table and not how it would affect online. So I'm glad this was brought up, because going forward, we can start taking a closer look at that. So thank you for the feedback. We will start incorporating that.
So Jonathan, I have a related question for you. Obviously, as the creative manager, you're mostly skinning cards after they're designed. But much like some cards are beloved in some circles and others, there are series and stories that are beloved and hated by different groups. You know, Amber, for example, is a huge Voyager fan, and then we have other players in the community that want to pretend that series didn't exist. And Enterprise, also a particularly polarizing. How do you go about creatively choosing which creative to apply to satisfy all these disparate demands from Star Trek fans?
I do try to keep in mind, as I look at the set in Utopia Planitia, do we have some balance among different series? You know, I don't want all the cards to come from DS9 or whatever. I do have a list of episodes that have never appeared on cards in second edition, and I make a special point of trying to see, can I draw anything out of those episodes to put on cards. There are certain episodes that, you know, just because of what design is emphasized, we've got a bunch of cards from this episode, and then there's others that have never been touched. So I do try to make an effort to include those when I can.
Sorry, I keep muting myself and forgetting to unmute myself. Someone in the chat room wants to know why J25 was not in the Delta Quadrant in 1E and it is in the Delta Quadrant in 2E. I don't know if that was your card or not, but you have been asked to explain yourself. Did you have anything to do with that card, Jonathan?
Yeah, I do remember working on that card. That was back during Matt's tenure.
I guess that really wouldn't be creative either. That would be design. That was
Yeah,
a
I
long
don't
time ago.
specifically remember having anything to do with it being a Delta Quadrant mission. It's typically quadrant is set by design, and
Yeah,
creative just has to make a story that fits the quadrant.
I realized that afterwards. My apologies. All right, Nathan, the question here is there any chance of getting more affiliated based dilemmas in the future, i.e. your opponent on your left commands X?
There is every chance of that. I don't know that we have one in the design files at the moment, but that is certainly a design space that we are willing to go into.
All right, here's a question for everybody from our director of organized play. As a player, I have long wondered why 2E blatantly refuses to use a ban list the way that 1E does. Problem cards could be sent to timeout where rules and errata can sort out what the best change is, and in the meantime, the play environment is kept stable. What are the panel's thoughts on implementing a ban list? I guess we'll start there, and I will start with you, Jonathan. What do you think about having a ban list in 2E?
I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I feel like the fact that we're so, use virtual cards so much means that errata is adequate generally without bannings. I don't know. I haven't followed what cards have needed errata, in recent times as much. So I'm not sure. Have there been issues with errata not moving fast enough and cards lingering in the environment, in a toxic way for some time?
That's a complicated question, but I think there is a contingent of 2E players that would say yes. That there have been some cards that have been overly good for too long. Whether or not that justifies a ban list is a question that I'm asking you all to weigh in on. And I know we've talked about this before, but it's on the thread, so we get to talk about it again. So
the other thought I have is just that there is the Hall of Fame format, which looks to me like it's a fairly effective way of removing extremely powerful cards from the environment.
I suppose the difference there is that you can only remove a card in Hall of Fame if it's old enough. the one I'm thinking of, I think, is it The Enemy of My Enemy? Is that the Cardassian cheater
Yes.
that's all the rage? Like that one wouldn't be eligible for a Hall of Fame vote for 4 more years. So a ban list would allow you to deal with it now. That's the only difference. Not trying to opinion on the validity of it. I'm deliberately trying not to say anything. But Amber, what do you think about a 2E ban list?
I have mixed emotions on this. The main concern I see is that we'd have to get enough people to agree on what needs to be on the ban list. So perhaps that would have to be, a certain number of department leads agree on it. But considering how you say the last few years have gone, I think there is a place for a limited temporary ban list. As you gave the example of Enemy of My Enemy, we've been saying for a while that needs to be changed. There's been problems with it. So if that could get, say, removed for 3 or 6 months while a solid fix was made, I think that could help the game. So overall, yes, I think it could be time to try out a limited version of it.
Nathan, your thoughts?
I wouldn't be totally opposed to a limited version of it. I know in 1E, the part of the point of the ban list was to take cards out while 1E could figure out how to convert them or change them in such a way that they work. And I don't feel like we need a full ban list, but we could use a smaller limited version, like Amber said, with Enemy of My Enemy. The biggest problem I would see with that is if you take the Enemy of My Enemy or whichever card out for 3 to 6 months while you work on a change, that's also 3 to 6 months of that card not being played and not seeing how that card actually works in the game. So it's not something that I'd want to just tack on to everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So just real quickly, I don't want to get too down the 1E rabbit hole, but the 1E ban list was created for a lot of different reasons. Some of them were cards that didn't work backwards compatible. Some of them were cards that Decipher famously never would ban a card, and they would make Magic Bullet after Magic Bullet after Magic Bullet, going so far as to make an entire mechanic based around it. And the original ban list was largely just cards that were called out by ref cards, plus things that are just really, really unfun. 2E shouldn't ever have if you create the 2E ban list under the same logic that 1E had, it should never be that big, because 2E, by the time it was created, had 10 years of, oh, we shouldn't have done that, to learn from. There was just so much more learning curve mistakes made in 1E that 2E never had to deal with, because it learned all those lessons. So it would be somewhat of a different context, just to clarify that. But TJ, you're up. What do you think about a ban list in 2E?
I'm absolutely against the ban list. It reminds me a little bit of Decipher's what was a Lord of the Rings or so, where you have different cards with ban list and X list. I think if you really want to ban a card, then mistakes are made before. You see, there are some cards that were very controversial and they stay on the watch list for far too long. And I think it's easier to use erratas for changing cards and maybe do 1, 2, or more errata if it's needed, because if somebody is not loving a card because it's so strong, we should react faster to make changes with the cards. And you also have options if you don't want to face a card in a game, especially when you have your own tournaments, then you have a gentleman's agreement or house rules for not playing that card. But I'm totally against banning a card. So creating or changing the card, it's the first choice. For example, the Enemy of My Enemy, it has an errata. An errata should be tested, so you can see the card for a while. But if a card is on the watch list and is not errated when there's a problem with a card and it takes 1 year, then it's simply too long. The problem is that some of the overpowered cards are played for more than a year, and that is a problem. So if you react a little bit faster, I think that would be the first choice. I can't hear you.
Charlie.
Thank you for that topic discussion. I'm continuing. Again, sorry. Sorry, again, I did not do any prep for this, but doesn't look like there was any more questions. So let me open it to the people listening in the public. What did you want to hear us talk about that we didn't talk about? In the meantime, I'm going to ask all of you guys to sort of, T-Jark, you don't have to do the looking back part of this since you're new, but I want you to sort of give me your biggest success and your biggest failure as a department over the past year, and tell me something that you're looking to do in 2020 as we move forward. So we'll start with you, TJ, but what are you looking forward to changing or doing differently in 2020 that everybody can look forward to?
Yes, I want to give the errata team a little bit more speed. We're working on a roadmap, and the roadmap stands, and I want to work it a little bit more speedy, a little bit more effective. And the problem is I have no experience to coordinate the decisions of a errata team with design, for example. So that is what I will focus on. But my key point is to make it a little bit more effective. I think some things in the past took too long for my taste. I'm also a fan of erase more cards than less cards. The problem is resources, and I don't want to get to a kind of mass errata, but I want to erase some cards that are not played very often, where I think errata team could make them more effective or more playable. That's a key target.
All right. So Nathan, real quick, biggest success from last year, biggest failure from last year, and things you're looking forward to in 2020.
Well, I have to say my biggest success, our biggest success in the design department is getting Inheritance out. That's really the first expansion that was kind of mine. Everything up to that point, John Corbett was the design director for. The biggest failure I think I had personally was a situation where we had a couple of cards that were not part of any given expansion. And when presenting those to playtesting, I just kind of rolled them into one particular expansion, and it wasn't very well received. And that's an area that I could have communicated better. It was a behind the scenes thing, so it wasn't out on the public forums, but it's definitely something I could have handled better. Looking forward to next year, we've got some good work already done on the project I mentioned that is the 50th expansion is getting final touches on it now from a design standpoint. And we've actually already started working on the next 3 expansions. So they're kind of being designed in parallel rather than in succession as we've done in the past. So I'm excited to see how that works.
I'm going to come back to Amber and Jonathan to do the retrospective, but I have a question from the chat room for you. Why, in your opinion, I guess the question is, in your opinion, are the enemy of my enemy and casualties of occupation a problem? If they are, what lessons from those are you taking forward?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there at the end, but I think I got the gist of it. I do think both of those cards were problems and kind of still are problems. And I think both of them go back to the same root, and that is neither one of them was properly culturally enforced. With the enemy of my enemy, particularly before the first errata on it, which there may be another one, I don't know, that'd be for DJ, but it didn't care what type of personnel you got the attributes and skills from, so you could get, you know, the biggest personnel in the game, and you didn't put them in your deck because you wanted to play them just to get this one personnel to be really huge to complete missions. That should have only gotten from Cardassian personnel in the first place. If we had started where it is now, it may still have needed an errata, but the biggest mistake was not being culturally enforced. And with Casualties of the Occupation, it's a similar principle. It was really designed to be for a dual headquarters deck, but it never required that. So now you can play it in any deck that has Cardassian personnel and a way to get Bajorans into the discard pile, which is any Cardassian deck. So I think the biggest takeaway from those two cards is going forward, we need to be more careful about making sure that our cards are properly culturally enforced, that they work for the affiliations that they're intended to work for, and not in ways or in decks that they're not intended to work in.
All right, thank you for asking that question. Amber, I'm going to send it over to you. Looking back at 2019, biggest success and biggest failure for the rules department, and then something you're looking to change or deal with in 2020.
Probably the biggest thing this year was getting the dual-sided cards worked out. Thanks to my awesome team for helping with that, so we have it working. Biggest issue probably be just sometimes not responding on things very quickly, especially towards the end of the year. It seems like between holidays and some of the general slowing down that we've seen on the boards, some things have gone without being taken care of. So that's, I guess, my goal in 2020 is to work more quickly.
Sorry. Thank you for that answer, Amber. Jonathan, your turn. Biggest success and failure from the past year and things you're looking to do differently in 2020.
Nothing really stands out to me as a great success for creative. I think we did okay work. It was fine, but nothing that really jumps out at me as, oh, look at us, we did this. In terms of failures, there were a couple of cards that I recall that changed in design after creative had already signed off on them. And so the end result was that the flavor didn't really make sense because something had changed. And I wish we could have avoided that. I also feel like the set title, A Less Perfect Union, was a very poor choice of a set title. But unfortunately that was made, I guess I maybe didn't follow communications closely enough or something, that was made without my input. But it's a sufficiently unclear reference that people outside of an American context don't understand, that I don't think it was a good choice. In terms of changes that I want to make, the biggest thing I want to do is recruit more people for the creative team, because I don't really have anybody. I've got one person who makes good contributions, but on a fairly limited basis. And I tried to recruit people last year and it never actually happened. So I'm hoping that under the new brand manager, that's something that will occur.
Sounds like a worthy goal and something that if you need help with, you can always reach out to Daniel Madison. He's able to help with stuff like that if you need to do it sooner rather than later. So with that, I don't think we have any more questions.
If I may,
sure.
I'm watching the chat room as well. and there's some conversation about the enemy of my enemy, and that it is the game text is something that would be more mechanically fitting for Bajorn affiliation than Cardassian affiliation. That is something that I agree with, and that's also part of when I say that we should make sure that things are working for the affiliations they should be working for. That's something we need to take a closer look at as well. That the cards we make, whatever they do, is something that that affiliation is supposed to be doing.
Good answer, I think. Well, I'm biased. Yeah. Anyway, so final thoughts from everybody. Anyone want to say anything? I mean, obviously, this is a bit of a different situation since we have the previous director had stepped down. A lot of questions were directed to him. Had I had more time to prepare, maybe I would have been able to extract better questions. So I apologize for that. But, you know, we're going to be hiring a new director here soon. Again, check for an article on that in the next couple days. What final thoughts does everybody have that they would like to share, if any, about where 2E is and where it's going? I'll just open the table to anyone who wants to jump in. All right, that's fine. So, Nathan,
Well,
you can say something?
Yeah, if I may. In my opinion, one thing that I've learned from one of my work mentors is that feedback is a gift, regardless of whether it's saying, hey, you did good, or hey, there's something you can do better. As long as it's constructive, any feedback is a gift. So any feedback that anybody has for design or where we're going or what you've heard today, I would love to hear it.
Excellent. Yeah, this organization exists to serve people and their interest in the game. So we can only do that if you're talking to us. And even if you're upset, your feedback is valuable. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Apologies for everyone that was looking for Neil and his sexy Scottish accent and or suplexes. Hopefully we'll sort out his tech issues for the show next week. Speaking of next week, the executive officer, Maggie Geppert, will be having a period of review. I believe it's next Saturday, time to be announced. And the Omnibus call-in show is next Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully Neil will get his tech fixed and be here to moderate that. But essentially it will be all of the other departments and any lingering questions that people have. So if something didn't get covered today and you want to call in or post a question about it, you can do that next Sunday. Again, I want to thank I have a cat. Hello, kitty. I'd like to move the cat. Thank everyone for coming, and the panelists, TJ, Nathan, Amber, and Jonathan, for your time. Thank you everyone who submitted questions, live and previously in the poll, and live long and prosper, everybody. I am going to end the broadcast.